This is Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project dealing with deindustrialization and economic development. And today I'm talking with former Mayor Dan Canan, who served 3 terms as mayor of Muncie and completed his last day, I guess, on the job in January 2008, and is now president of the Bowl Memorial Hospital Foundation. The date is January 29th, 2008, and Dan, I want to begin by thanking you for agreeing to participate in our project. I'd like to begin with a question really pertains to what your involvement in Muncie area economic development has been, how long you've been involved in economic development.
Ever since I was mayor, so starting in 1996, January the 1st, when I was first sworn in as mayor until the day I walked out of the door, it really is a issue that kind of dominates your agenda when you're mayor, because it is the key issue for your community, is providing jobs and opportunities for people that live in your community, which off of that comes growth of your community. So I was very involved during the 12 years I was mayor.
Would you say that as mayor, that was, not to put words in your mouth, probably your highest priority?
Absolutely. It's
okay.
The #1 priority, because everything comes off of that. You know, if you have people that have jobs, they're paying property taxes, which is how government's funded. You know, they're buying services at retailers, at restaurants, which allows them to grow. Because property taxes, at least for now, is the way that we fund things, you know, in local government. If you have new facilities building, you know, that's more tax-based. So in my personal experience and other mayors I talk to, economic development is the #1 issue they deal with.
Okay. In a preliminary conversation before we began the tape part of this interview, you talked a little bit about how this was staffed in the mayor's office, that the model that is in place in Muncie is perhaps not the model used in a lot of other places. And I'd like you to comment at that and then bring in the importance of the vision programs that are run by the Chamber of Commerce.
Absolutely. I think there certainly was a conception on my part when I was first elected mayor that economic development was under the thumb of the mayor. You know, the mayor actually had a person on staff in City Hall that did economic development. And I think in some cities that is true. Back when I first came in office, I know that's the way that Kokomo did it. I know it's the way Anderson did it. I don't know how they're doing it now, but that's the way they used to do it. So that was kind of a typical scenario of how economic development was done. So it was kind of what I expected when I became mayor, was that the economic development, even though I had no experience in it, would be the model that was in place. But here it's entirely different. And I was probably a little uncomfortable with the scenario that I found when I became mayor. And the scenario here is you have a private nonprofit under the umbrella of the chamber called the Vision Program. It's always on a 5-year program, so now it's Vision 2011, who actually does your economic development. My resistance to it was that, you know, being a political figure who had just been elected, you want to control things, you know, because if you're going to take the heat for something, you want to make sure that you have the ability to try to change that. So I was a little uncomfortable with it until I became really accustomed to, you know, what the history was, why it was set up that way, and the reasoning was very simple. Mayors change every 4 years, and it would make a whole lot of sense for your economic development person to change every 4 years.
Right.
What we have in Muncie and Delaware County is the stability of a long-term staff. Terry Murphy's been in that position for many years. He is a professional. I don't know what he's paid, but my guess is he's probably paid more than could ever happen in a political environment with budget cuts. So it allows him to operate with a lot of stability. He's not at the whims of politicians. And so after I became accustomed with it and started working with Terry, I think any other system would be a failure. You know, this is really the way to do it. When I left office, the new mayor coming in has the niceties of being able to see an economic development staff that's already in place that understands, you know, the history of why these factories have closed, that understands how we got Sally Maker and has all that history. So the system we have is I think a pretty progressive system, and it is funded through donations, contributions in the community from businesses and organizations in our community. So it's a win for everybody.
Okay. Take me through a possible scenario where somebody is identified as having some interest to come to Muncie, and here you are in the mayor's office, and Terry's out working the streets to try to get people interested in coming to Muncie. How does that play out in terms of the mayor and Terry and other staff people?
You initially the mayor's not too involved. Terry does a lot of activities. He is not only here locally, but he also goes out to trade shows. He identifies trade shows, so he's across the country at trade shows. And so, I kind of look at it as a funnel. Initially, there'll be he will get a contact in his office, either by mail, probably email, through the internet now, that will express interest. And the initial letter will be very vague. We'll just have general information about what they're looking at. A lot of it comes down to what's your taxes, what are your tax breaks, what's your workforce, and we need 100 acres.
Right.
So that's kind of the shotgun that this consultant has sent out for his client, who is the prospective company.
Right.
Approach, and Terry responds back to that with the obvious information. Sometime from that initial shotgun, there will be a selection process where this initial multitude of hits that the consultant has sent out will get skinny down to probably 4 or 5 actual locations.
Okay.
So through this whole process, I as mayor have not been involved at all. Okay. Terry might have mentioned it to me, but really there's no decisions to make. Once it comes to the point that you have a consultant that has probably selected 3, 4, or 5 potential sites, then you're looking at a site visit. So that is when Terry would have myself and the county commissioners, at least one of the 3, usually involved in those meetings, along with council members and some others. So at that point in time, you've probably got the consultant coming to town. You might have a company representative who's not identified by company, because at this point usually we don't know what type of company. We don't know the name of the company that is coming here. And you might have a couple others. Usually you have a financial person from the company that's come with them. Okay. Probably a local realtor that represents the site that we're looking at, and then there would be some local people here. So that would be the point when I would initially have the contact, when the mayor would initially have contact. The other scenario is, and this has happened several times too, where you have a company that's really wants to learn more about the community. So that you might have the same group come in, you have a consultant, some company people, and Terry might put together either a dinner or a meeting. And at that meeting, they want to talk to the Work One representatives, they want to talk to Ivy Tech people, they want to talk to Ball State people, the hospital individuals, local school, and they want to kind of, then it comes down to what's your workforce, what's the education level, what's retraining opportunities that are here. They want to make sure that the political leaders are committed to their projects. So either one of those scenarios can happen, and sometimes that second scenario can then the next day end up in site visits. So really, as mayor, I kind of sat back, and when Terry would call and say, I need you, I can't remember of any instance I was not there. So Terry leads the charge, and he kind of called. A lot of times these happen very quickly. So it's always been my experience that when you have your site visit, they're going to make their decision in 2 weeks. Oh, okay. Which always means months to multiple months to get it.
Let's play with a case study, which is certainly one of the great successes of your time as mayor, and that is if you could briefly describe the scenario that ultimately got Sally May here.
Okay. That was a very interesting scenario. Initial contact was made with Terry about Muncie. The initial project was 2 projects. Sally May was going to do 2 separate call centers in 2 separate communities. Sally May's initial approach was, and we're seeing companies do more, or we're seeing more companies do more of this, they wanted to be in a small community because they wanted to be instead of being a mediocre employer with a number of employees in a larger community, they would rather be a large employer in a small community. They kind of set the trend there. Right. So the initial place was 2 smaller communities. Can't remember exactly what they were, but that's what they were looking at. They kind of played with Muncie, but really they weren't too interested in us initially. So Terry brought us back to, Terry would do this. We had our initial meetings with them, they weren't really interested. So Terry brought us all together, and by all of us, I'm talking about, commissioners were there, and I was there, and job people, and he would brief us on it. And so as we sat around the table, I would always ask the question of Terry, well, what do you want to do next? Because Terry's the type that when he tells you what the problem is, he has some possible solutions with that. You just need to ask him for them. So he suggested that we give another, let's go at him again. And he said, so we juiced the contract up, the offer up a little bit. I think we started offering some dollars to them. Right. Kind of ironically, Sally Mae was looking at 2 separate communities, and they were looking at grocery store buildings, because I forget what the square footage, what they needed was, but there were 2 grocery store buildings that they were looking at, 2 separate communities that were not Marsh, but both grocery stores had gone out of business, and they were the same chain. Right. Ironically, when they started, and Sally Mae was on a very fast track, they really did get this project done quickly. Ironically, as Sally Mae made offers on these buildings, there was a problem because the buildings had, this chain and these empty buildings had just gotten bought by a new organization, and they weren't really interested in selling them initially, so it kind of stopped the process. So Sallie Mae kind of got back into a corner in that they couldn't go where they really wanted to go, which has happened sometimes. So Terry does a good job of keeping contact. He doesn't take no for an answer. He keeps contact with them. So when Sallie Mae kind of got in that problem, then Terry talked to him about, well, let's consolidate both of them into one. We had the spec building out there.
Right.
It was large enough to handle them.
Yeah.
And so it really kind of came down to, okay, you know, what's the deal going to be? So, and they were working, I think they're still always working with another community. Where they are not, they always tell you they work with other communities.
Yeah.
So we ended up putting together a pretty good offer for them. They are like most companies. They want to try to minimize their startup cost. You know, they like to amortize them over the period of time they think they're going to be there. So, you know, the city and the county went together, and we helped pay for some of their startup costs. Their big payouts are towards the end. You know, they have to pay quite a bit of money back at the end of the project, but that allows them to amortize it over the period of time they're here. So I still remember the meeting where we were going down to meet with Sallie Mae. This was when we were sure they were coming here with 500 jobs. And we had them, you know, in the spec building. Terry did a whole lot. I'm making this real simple, but Terry obviously did a whole lot of work. Right. So we're down there, and I remember John Brooks there, the county commissioner. I'm there. I think Bill Schroyer was there. Of course, Terry was there. Dan Allen was there. There might have been another person or two from Muncie that went down to Castleton and met with the Sallie Mae people. And they had a whole bunch of Sallie Mae people around the table. So we started our discussion, and with Sallie Mae, one thing about them is they have a lot of accountants there, and so they're very, very to the penny.
The sharp pencil guys.
Absolutely. And they said, well, we've got a problem. Well, what's the problem? Well, instead of 500, they need 700, and so now there's not enough parking out there. So we're saying, well, we don't really think that's a problem. That's probably a problem we can work through. So, you know, it's one of those projects that really kind of mushroomed on us. The first time I met Sallie Mae, they were looking at 2 spec buildings. They were looking at the building out of 332 and 69, and the second building, I can't remember. There was 2 buildings they were looking at. I can't remember. Well, I met him, Tom Bennington, I met him out there at 332 and 69 at that building, and then Terry took him to a secondary, but I can't remember what it was. But you know, a lot of these take a lot of massaging, that what Terry does, you know, dealing with them and never taking no for an answer. And you know, our response was we were basically shut out of Sallie Mae at that point in time, you know, initially, and Terry said, well, let's just take another swipe at him. Let's keep contact. Yeah. And that's what he kept doing.
So perseverance paid off.
Absolutely, it did. And you had political people who were willing to listen to Terry, which I'm sure is the same today.
Right.
And you know, in 12 years that I was mayor, there was obviously a lot of political turmoil, but I don't care if there was Republicans that charged the county commissioners, which there were one time I was in, or Democrats, which there certainly were. I never experienced any kind of political playing with the commissioners in my office when it came to economic development. Okay. You know, everybody put their hands together and did what we had to do to get the jobs here. Okay.
Had you ever been involved with economic development efforts before you became mayor?
No, I had not. I owned a small pharmacy just south of the downtown area. So you know, I had my little business, but I was not a chamber member, was not involved at all. Had no involvement with the community at all from that standpoint.
When you think back on your preparation and your educational background, what kinds of things have been of greatest value in your efforts in the area of economic development?
Probably more than anything would be owning my own business. Even though it was a very small business, it was a neighborhood business. It did give me that business perspective. I did have to make payroll every Friday, even though it was only for 12 people. I had to make payroll every Friday. Yeah. And I think that when you're talking to somebody who's going to bring a business to your community, talking to somebody that has the business experience, having a mayor that has the business experience, wasn't a huge factor, but certainly wasn't a negative. Okay.
You mentioned the Sallie Mae initiative. I wonder if you could, for the record, give me some examples of some other economic development initiatives you were involved with while you were mayor.
Magna.
Oh, okay.
Magna project was another one that you know, kind of changed a whole lot through the process there, and their initial. The ironic story with that, and hopefully Dan will talk about this too. They were looking at Anderson, Muncie, and a community in Ohio. Can't tell you exactly what the community is. And we've gotten down to, so those are the 3 towns they were looking at. And again, it was, I think they had a consultant, and then Dan Mills, who had been hired, who had come from Borg, but had basically been hired to run this new facility and build it in front of this new facility. Those were the 3 communities they were looking at. So to Magna's credit, they basically had agreed to a deal with us. I can't remember all the particulars.
Yeah.
One reason they cited was that they were offered more money in veteran cities out of Anderson, but they questioned their ability to deliver on them. They didn't question Terry's ability to deliver. So I mean, there was a credibility issue there that Terry certainly had. The other interesting part is, I guess, after they'd already agreed to a deal with us, the governor of Ohio called them, offered to put, I can't remember the number, but it was in excess of $1 million into that project to encourage them to come to Ohio. And to Magna's credit, they said, we've already made our commitment to Muncie, and that's where we're going. Where they could have very easily backed out and gone somewhere else. So another project that I had a lot of, again, direct involvement in. The ones that I think stick in your mind are the ones that you think you had and you didn't. We had the company that is the largest company that makes huge mining equipment up in Milwaukee. They had come in here. They were going to go in the ABB facility. We had extremely good meetings with them. Their problem was they had a facility, I think it was over 100 years old. The fixed costs on it were real large because of the type of facility. It was in the metropolitan Milwaukee area, so it was on a very good location from an industrial standpoint, and they were going to shut it down and move here. We were about as close as you could be to putting on the bottom and line, and a new CEO came in and said, I'm not going to, last thing I'm going to do is make this huge change. So that was one. We had another. So we had a couple other ones out there that really are very, very close. That's why it's a good thing for us, and I never did, not to go to the newspaper and talk about what you're working on. Because you get people's expectations up, and a lot of these deals fall through.
How many jobs would that walking would have been?
Oh my, I can't remember, but the nice thing about it was it involved a lot of welders. ABB had a lot of welders, even though they've been out of.
But a lot of welders around Muncie.
A lot of welders around Muncie, so the talent pool was really compatible to Muncie, which is a huge issue. And this was probably, 8 years ago we worked on that one, so the time ABB closed and this we're working on was not a whole lot, so a lot of those people were still around Muncie.
In your view, as kind of a general comment, as you look back on economic development initiatives, what works and what doesn't work?
Integrity and honesty, I think, works. I think that, kind of going back to Terry, these consultants deal with enough people, they can see through somebody who's shucking and jiving them, or somebody who's maybe putting too much on the table that they don't think can deliver. So I think the main thing is you have to have your personal integrity. I don't mean one person, but I'm talking about as a community. That team that's representing the community in economic development has to be knowledgeable and have a trust level and certainly have integrity, because that work's going to get. These consultants talk to each other, and if they've been shafted by somebody, then that work's going to get out.
Being a kind of Presbyterian Trinitarian, I'll pick the number 3 out of the air and ask you what do you think the 3 most important things are that Muncie should address in its efforts to foster economic development? I mean, you may have 10, but just try and think of 3.
One of them is the appearance of the community.
Okay.
It's a huge issue.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about that. Yeah.
It's why my initiative to clean up the downtown was number 1 on my agenda when I became mayor. I hate to say it, had nothing to do with cleaning up the downtown. It had to do with economic development. There was, of course, a direct correlation between the visuals of your community. So, blight is a big issue now. It's really accelerated in the last couple of years because of the home foreclosures. But a lot of times, your economic people that come to town don't see the neighborhoods, but it's your main thoroughfares. Trying to clean some of those things up. So that's a huge issue. What was your question? What was the 3 main?
3 most important things Muncie should address in its efforts to foster more economic development, and you mentioned.
The
downtown,
the overall appearance of the community, which includes Ball State, includes the hospital. So that's certainly one of them. Having, there's a plus and a negative side to having higher than normal unemployment. The negative side is you have a lot of people unemployed. The plus side is it's really one thing that employers look at. They've got to make sure that once they make a determination to come to a community, that there's the people that are available. So having a workforce that has an education level. You have to have a force that, because you're not going to have somebody come in here that's going to duplicate the job they probably had. So you have to have a workforce that has the ability, first of all, to be retrained,
Right.
then you have to have the assets in your community to provide that retraining. That's why Ivy Tech is usually so big.
Right.
Because they're very good on that. And then another one is available land. You know, when it really comes down, it comes down to the inventory. You have to have the inventory. You know, Sally Mae really came. There were 100 issues out there, but one of the main issues was having a building. We needed a building that had 50,000 square feet. We had a spec building we'd been sitting on for 5 years waiting for the right company to come forward. So having an abundant inventory, and you know, we don't have. Terry has kind of worked on some mega sites, which would be a 2,000 to 3,000 acre site. You know, let's assume a Toyota one, but you know, you have to have that. So even though you would not have it, you wouldn't own it all. You would certainly have it plotted out. You would know who the owners are. You kind of have some ideas. So having a strong inventory of either buildings, and a lot of times, you know, just the 12 years I was there, you would have prospects that would be looking at a time frame to start up in a year or two. You know, they would come in, they were going to build a facility, they would do all that. Well, now what it's kind of coming down to, not in manufacturing still usually wants to build, but when it comes down to your high-tech companies, they're normally on a pretty short time frame, and they're wanting, you know, when do you have this open now? When can we get into it? You know, we want to be open in 6 months, and that was kind of Sally Mae, I think, inked the deal in, what was it, the first part of the year? I think they actually started remodeling the building like in August, and we're ready to open in October. You know, so they had a very, very quick turnaround time.
Okay. How do schools figure into this?
They're huge.
Okay. Wow.
Schools, and I think it comes back to what I just said.
Yeah.
The education level and the retraining.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about people moving to town and having a kind of school system where they want to send their kids.
It's more than just you know, I kind of always hate the term quality of life because it's kind of a misused term. But it really comes down to it's more than just the schools. What kind of recreational facilities?
Yeah, I was going to get to the recreation and environmental stuff next. Yeah.
But you know, so a cardinal greenway is very important.
Okay.
A nice trail system is very important. We don't have the oceans. We don't have the mountains. We don't have some. You know, our climate does get cold here in the wintertime. So those are negative issues. You know, to some employers, because and it depends upon the type of company. You know, if you've got a company that's going to try to attack, you know, you've got a high tech company that's looking to hire people in the $50,000 to $100,000 range with certain, you know, qualifications. They've got to also talk to themselves internally. Is this a community those people will move?
Right.
Will
exactly.
move to?
Yeah.
And so, it's an issue that we were facing in the in economic development, that even sometimes we're bringing jobs here with high pay. And a lot of those high-paid people are living not in Muncie; they're living in Carmel, they're living in Fishers.
Right. Yeah.
And it's the whole move behind Jarden moving out of downtown Muncie. There was no dislike of their facilities; they needed to remodel them.
Right. Yeah.
There was no issue with John Fisher and the Fisher building.
Right.
They certainly had plenty of parking. In fact, they liked downtown Muncie. But some of their higher-ranking officials were living, you know, on the other end of I-69. And we're complaining about the drive, and since it was time to make some, you know, their lease was up, so it was time for them either to remodel there or look at moving. That was a huge factor behind them moving. Was they moved close enough to down Muncie that their secretarial staff and their, you know, administrative staffs that were there wouldn't mind driving, but it got close enough to the interstate, right on the interstate, that was a real attraction to.
For the guys from Carmel and
that's right.
in Fishers area, yeah. What obstacles did you encounter in the process of trying to sell Muncie in terms of economic development?
Money. You know, everything comes back to money. I mean, how you promote your cities, you know, costs money. The vision staff costs money. It's not costing out the city, but it does cost money.
Right.
Travels to Japan costs a lot of money. Buying, you know, the 12 years I was there, maybe I mentioned this, that initially, you know, back in the beginning, they would come to town, coming to town, was just looking, comparing tax abatements. Well, by the time I left, you know, they want to know what your tax abatements are, but they're expecting free land.
Yeah.
And usually a building at a discount.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the cost of just even sitting at the table with those final four has escalated tremendously. And the vision program, though it's funded for its staff, it doesn't have a deep pool of resources to buy buildings. The city really doesn't either. I mean, you know, we have economic development dollars, and so does the county. And the commissioners that are there now, you know, we work very closely, and Sally Mae was strictly a joint You know, we're both, but there's a long bond that's, I think it's a 10-year bond on the Sallie Mae building that both the city and the county are gonna be paying on for 10 years. So though that was good for that project, that's gonna permanently take, or not permanently, for 10 years, it's gonna take some economic development dollars to feed that you can't use somewhere else. So, you know, if you had unlimited dollars, you would have a nice inventory out there, you would buy some properties, you would certainly be able to promote better. So you have very, very limited dollars, and you've got a huge crisis in this state with property taxes. So you've got dwindling dollars almost, and resources to bring them are dwindling when at the same time. So in other words, because you have a town that's losing its manufacturing, you've got less dollars, which means you need to do more economic development. It's like the guy who used to work at GM's now working at Walmart. You know, he's trying to pay the same bills with a lot less money.
You know, just to go off on a little bit of a sidebar, which goes back to my labor project, is it a problem with people looking at Muncie that this is considered to be kind of an old union town?
Absolutely, it's a huge issue.
Okay, well, talk about that.
And even though, and I've heard Dan Allen do this, in Japan, I've heard him do it at the table here in Muncie with prospective clients. He does a very good job because he has a manufacturing background, which I don't. He does a very good job of talking about the old union attitude, the new union attitude, which was true. You know, the cooperation between union and management doesn't mean they always hold hands, but they certainly had a different attitude. Even though that attitude has changed dramatically, and the fact that new manufacturing is coming here, like Canan and Magna, have not been unionized. There's no attempt to unionize them. We still have that stigma.
Okay.
And it's not just Muncie; it's East Central Indiana.
Right.
And so, ironically, I've told this story 1,000 times. You could be in Japan, and of course, before you ever get there, they've done their homework on not only you. They know about you. They know you've got 2 kids. And they know some things like that. They know about your community. So you get through the niceties, and you get through the teas in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the nice conversation, and then it becomes very directly. The questions are, what is your workforce? What is the education level? The availability of your workforce, union attitude, and like I said, Dan does a very eloquent job. So it's Terry, and addressing that issue, but it is still a stigma that we have, and it probably goes to Ohio, or it probably goes up into Michigan, so more than just East Central Indiana, but that's all I'm familiar with because of my dealings. So huge, huge, huge issue. Now, as we work with Japan, one thing that is in our favor, the East and the West Coast are too expensive for them. You know, the labor's expensive, ground's expensive. They like the work ethic through the Midwest. You know, because one thing about people through the Midwest is, you know, they come to work on Monday morning, they work till Friday afternoon. When hunting season's in, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference they're there. In the South, it's a little more casual attitude. You know, especially if you get in the deep South. So, you know, Indiana has the 3rd largest percentage of Japanese manufacturing and investment. It's one of the manufacturing investment. It's in Indiana. So Japanese like Indiana. The problem is they like small towns, and they're going to go back. They're the big boy in town. There's usually never been any previous union activity. So you see them in Princeton, you see them in Greensburg, you see them in those type of communities. You see them in Elwood. You see them in communities like that.
They're the big dogs there.
They are the big dogs.
As you look back, and this, I guess I'm going to ask this in the context, if it changed during your 3 terms as mayor, is Muncie a hard or easy sell? As a community?
I think as a community, we're a pretty easy sell. Just the community as a whole. Now, the other factors, like do you have the land, do you have the building they want, you know, those are very volatile. But you know, because we cleaned up the downtown, because you can take somebody downtown and not be embarrassed by what you see, and Ball State certainly always does a very nice job, and the hospital always do a very nice job. And then, you know, the physical attractions that have happened at the university now, of course, with the new tower going up at the hospital, it shows so the community really shows well. And one thing you hear, especially if if you have somebody who comes to town and stays here for a day or 2, is they talk about how friendly the community is. So I think Muncie as itself is really a pretty easy sell. The factors of do you have the land, you know, is obviously becomes part of that, but you don't have to spend a lot of time saying, well, you know, we got nice people that work here, and it's a pretty safe community, and this, that, and the other. And you know, one of our selling points is that, you know, there's international airports in Dayton, Indianapolis, so though you don't have it here, you're close to it, but you don't have the expense of all those facilities. You certainly, you can get anywhere you want to in 5 minutes in Muncie. So Muncie becomes really a pretty easy sell as a community.
Okay, better now, do you think, than say 12 years ago?
And yes, and I would attribute that to the downtown.
Okay.
You know, the appearance of our community. One thing I tried to do as mayor was, make sure that I made a conscious effort to pave main thoroughfares coming into town. So as Dan Allen would tell the story that years ago they brought a Japanese manufacturer to town, came in Hoyt Avenue, went to
right.
I guess they didn't bring them in, they came in on their own, came down Hoyt, which then was just a terrible road to come down.
Yeah.
And the downtown area it was all isolated.
Yeah.
They had reservations to stay at the Robert, they didn't even stay, they just turned around and went back.
Okay.
Because their first impression was
so negative.
What's the old story? You only get one chance to make a good first impression.
Yeah.
And the first impression was bad. So I think it's a much easier sell now.
What do you think are the particular attractions, the most specific ones, for entities interested in economic activities in the Muncie area? I mean, you mentioned some of them in your previous answers, but if you were to kind of bundle them and collect them and just come up with a list of maybe 3 or 4. I'm the person looking at Muncie. You've been very involved in this over the past decade plus a few years. What's a town have to offer me?
One of the main one is now, the last couple of years I was in office, there's less manufacturing type opportunities coming along,
okay,
but more high tech.
Okay.
And those high tech are looking for employees. So Ball State University is huge, and I can't underemphasize how huge the CICS program, the communications that can happen between Ball State staff and it's not the president. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the actual professors, the department heads that are running these departments that can really communicate. And you can have a Steve Jones sit there who has been successful on the outside can now talk about high tech language. About this is the kind of person you need, these are the kind of students we graduate. A good example of that was after we had Sally Mae in town, some of the guys I dealt with, one of the guys called me, Jeff called me, and he said most people think that call centers are just hourly people.
Right.
We have a cavalcade of hourly people that work here, and he said even though they make good money, he says most people underestimate that there is a management staff. And he told me then that every number of call people has to have a manager, and then on top of that you got another layout manager. So he says, and those are good paying jobs. And he says, nobody in this country has a college curriculum to teach that talent.
Yeah, right.
And he said, do you think Ball State would be interested?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. So I called Dr. Gorham, quickly had a meeting with Dr. Gorham, and I think
might have been
Frank Sabatini was there.
Yeah, right, yeah.
A couple of us from Ball State, and so it's my understanding out of that meeting, they now have a curriculum at Ball State that trains, which most students probably wouldn't even think of, career path and call centers. They probably wouldn't even think of that, but there is, and they said it's a pretty lucrative management field to get in. And of course, from that you can obviously go up the food chain there at a company. So I would have to say probably the number one, because we're starting to deal with so many high-tech companies, is that connection to Ball State is huge, and Ball State has such a good reputation on the technology side.
We've talked a lot about how you identified, along with Terry and Dan and the Vision folks, what I'd call outside prospects. I want to ask you a little bit more of an internal question, and that is how you go about identifying local and area prospects, considering expanding or new ventures that aren't, of the Sally Mae variety. Trying to bring it a little closer to home.
Sure. I'm not 100% sure with the process they use, but I know part of it is so many of those companies are chamber members.
Oh, okay.
The chamber does a good job of communicating out what's going on. Terry's very well known in the community because to both the chamber board, and I was on there for a while, the DAC board.
What's DAC, just for the record?
Delaware Advancement Corporation.
Okay.
Terry always comes and makes presentations, so on that board is always 14, 15 people on both boards, and they are the leaders. They are your leaders of the community. So Terry has a very good relationship, and when somebody's looking to expand, just the same as when they're coming to town, they want to know what's available. What are my training dollars? Maybe they're available for the state. What is there to help me? So it's a quick call to Terry, and Terry does that. And there again, it's kind of the same process. Once Terry felt like I needed to be involved, or the commissioners, we aren't as involved as much locally.
Okay.
But he would certainly call us.
Okay. When large corporations consider closing facilities, and you've dealt with this during your life in Muncie, a few while you were mayor, what kind of local conditions do they cite for their decision to shut down?
Usually it just comes back to dollars and cents. And again, the 12 years I was there, when I first became mayor, it was Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Remember, that was the Borg Warner. Half of Borg Warner's initial business, the manual side of their transmission.
Yeah, hello, NAFTA.
Right, went down to Mexico.
Yeah.
Well, now it is truly a world economy, and it just comes down to they've got to compete on a worldwide scale. And my personal opinion is what has just decimated this country from a manufacturing standpoint is what they call free trade, but I would say it's unfair trade.
Yeah.
You cannot, and I don't fault the business. You can't fault the business for saying I'm going to relocate, or I've got to, a lot of these companies already have companion manufacturing in China, or now it's Vietnam. They're, ironically, they're in Vietnam now, and there are other countries over there. And they're paying pennies on the dollar they're paying here. They have no environmental concerns, which they have here, and I think it's a tragedy that we allow this to happen. There's the healthcare issues aren't the same, and you can't fault them because at the end of the day, they've got to prove to their taxpayers they're making a buck at the bottom line. So. If the worker in Indiana was just competing against the worker in Alabama, or the worker in California, or the worker in Nevada, we could build a case and keep him here.
Mm-hmm.
But when that worker is competing with somebody who's making a fraction of what they're doing, we don't have enough money to give them to make that. So in general, that's it. Now, if you look at the Ball Corporation corporate headquarters, I think that was not so much that issue as it kind of came back to, they have a lot of high-paid executives that can live in Muncie or Boulder, Colorado. And it came back to the mountains, the skiing, the things that our mountains just aren't quite as tall around here. And it comes into those factors. And of course, then you can take that back further, that the Ball family had been diluted, where they used to have ownership and have real leadership there. They transitioned out to more outside, and so the affinity and the attachment to Muncie wasn't there that the Balls had.
In a previous project I did many years ago, when George Sissel had just come to Muncie, and as you know, he ended up as CEO of Ball Corp for a time out in Colorado. But George is a really good friend of mine, and we were doing this project on attitudes toward work in Muncie back in the 70s. And I said to George, what you're really saying to me is you're out in Colorado, rising the corporate ladder, up the corporate ladder with Ball Corp. And if you succeed, you get to leave Boulder, Colorado, and come to Muncie, Indiana. And George looked at me with a stern look on his face and said, well, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way. So when I thought about the relocation back out to Colorado, it's, this is kind of like the dream of a lot of these people. We get to go back to the ski slopes and the mountains and all that kind of stuff.
And I'm sure a larger pool of talent.
Yeah,
as they want to, if they need to replace.
Yeah. Well, and at that point, as both of us know, they weren't really making much here anymore. When you think about it,
absolutely right.
A lot of manufacturing. As you look back on your 3 terms as mayor, what roads were not taken that might have been pursued to do more in this area?
Economic development. If I'm going to say we did anything wrong, we didn't start the Japanese initiative early enough.
Okay.
That was just started. I lose track of time now. I'm going to say 4 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
Was I think our first trip to Japan, maybe it was 3 years ago, was with the governor.
Okay.
Communities like, a lot of them weren't that far really ahead of us, but communities like Columbus, Indiana, who've been going over there for 10 years, had already built relationships.
Right.
And there was a reason for that. They had some Japanese companies down, which kind of precipitated that.
Yeah.
Really got a jump on us, and with the Japanese, and 1,000 people have said it's all about the relationships.
Right.
It's different than dealing with a United States-based company that's more about the bottom line and this, that, and the other. With the Japanese, it's all about how we feel about you, and this long-term relationship and building all that. So something we should have done sooner was our Far East Initiative, going Asia Initiative, and really you're talking about Japan. So that begs the question, which is kind of what we talked about before I left office, should we be in China now? Should we start, because obviously China's the next one, and then Vietnam, and there's some other countries. So should the city of Muncie start trips to China? I think, didn't the governor go to China? I think last time he did his trip.
I think so.
So I mean, the state's looking at that. So you've got to realize, it's kind of hard, because there again, you come down to these limited dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Do you start going to China now, knowing it's not going to pay off for 5 to 10 years at best?
Right.
Or do you try to go to Japan, where there's a lot of fertile, there's still fertile ground there, there's still big investment in Indiana, so we should have started that one earlier.
Well, what was the original impetus to get you folks to go to Japan? How'd that come about?
The first when Mitch Daniels first became, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about really until Mitch Daniels became governor.
Right.
Once he became mayor, he started his trade trip over there.
Right.
And his first meeting, I remember we had his first travel to Japan, he kind of had it open for other people to go.
Oh, okay.
Communities to go. Well, the city had determined that we would fund Terry to go, but that mushroomed up, and a whole lot of people ended up going on that. I think Roy Budd went on that, and I think Dr. Gore went on that too, on that very first mission. But we did not have any representatives from our economic development. We were just a little late behind the 8 ball.
Okay.
So the next year it rolled around, we wanted to be a part of it. So I went, Larry Crouch went, the county commissioners went, Terry went. That was the only contingent one over there. And one thing that Roy did for us, he discovered a gentleman named Larry Ingram. And Larry is headquartered in Carmel now. But Larry for years was he ran the office in Japan that was the economic development arm for Indiana in Japan. He ran that office. Speaks fluent Japanese, very, very well connected in Japan. So we hired this gentleman to basically help set up. The governor had an agenda, and he had certain meetings that we could go to with the governor. But then what we did was we hired Larry, who then set us up with our own meetings, because even though it was nice for us to go the first time, if 10 mayors walk into a meeting with a governor, all the eyes are on the governor.
Right, sure.
And Muncie gets diluted because you've got other mayors that are there from other communities. So we set up our own meetings, and then the second time we went back on our own, we did not go with the governor because we want to set our own agenda. So the second time we went back, and it was Dan Allen, who at that time Terry, Tom Bennington, and myself. That's the 4 was went that second time then. And we started even going back to some of the companies we've been to before, again, with these relationships. And then after we came back the first time, there were some other contacts, Japanese, so we made a trip to Chicago and dealt with a large construction company who does a lot of work for Japanese companies. So that was a long way to say, and it was something we should have done differently, was probably start that initiative a minimum of 5 years before we did.
But this is still pretty much front burner stuff, working with Japan.
And my hope is that Mayor McShirley, I've talked to Terry for a while. I assume they're going to plan. Well, when I left office, we were talking about planning a trip this year, and my hope is that she will go over there because it's an important agenda. It costs money, but it's an important thing to do.
What role do you think that Muncie should play as a center for what I would call larger East Central Indiana area economic development?
Talking about more like Energize ECI, you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting concept because conceptually, as mayor, I agreed that we needed to do what we could to improve East Central Indiana and bring jobs here. But as mayor of a town, I believe that concept. But at the same time, I believe more that if I can take away from Anderson and get to Marion and get to Muncie, I'm going to do it. So kind of the philosophy was, and I know Roy had more of an East Central Indiana footprint, but kind of what I agreed to, and other mayors agreed to. In fact, there's an idea that I brought up that Roy then got a document we kind of all signed, which was, if Terry's working on a project in Muncie or Delaware County, and let's say they need 150 acres on a rail line, and we don't have that, so he has to tell them no. What he does then is he would tell Roy, this is the contact, this is what they need. Why don't you see if Marion's got it, Randolph County's got it, Henry County's got it. And so it was kind of a if I can't, I'm gonna try to get them, but if I can't get them, let's try to have them go
Okay.
somewhere in this region. So I can't tell you how successful that's been, but
Right.
there's an agreement that we signed, kind of an interlocal agreement that the mayor signed, agreeing to have this kind of cooperation.
So that's kind of where we are as we begin 2008
Yes.
in terms
And
of.
the other side of it is, I mentioned earlier, in the old days, I'm sure you found this out from your previous discussions with the union representatives. A factory's built here, and everybody lives around the factory.
Yeah, right.
The guys, I think a lot of times didn't even drive to work. They walked to work
Right.
with lunch bucks.
Right.
So you had a Broadbricks, and a whole neighborhood
Yep.
develops around it, or you
Yep.
have Ball Corp, and they're manufacturing, and a whole neighborhood develops around it. Well,
Mhm.
now what you've got is, well, how close are you to the interstate?
Yeah, right.
Because people aren't going to, that was a real thing with Sally Mae. I think I mentioned that our first experience with Sally Mae was out of 332 and I-69.
Right.
Well, I would have done all I could to get them there,
Yeah.
but we had the opportunity to basically kind of put them in the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
The odds that people are driving from Marion and Anderson to Sally Mae diminish than if
Oh,
they're
yeah,
right out there on
right,
69.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the fact that we were
yeah.
able to move them in and kind of put them, even though they're on the edge
Yeah.
of the city, they're in the city, and it's not as easy to get to I-69 for Sally Mae. That was a real coup. That was something we really worked on. So, it's kind of like Jardin. We did all we could. In fact, offered more incentives to keep Jardin in downtown.
Mhm.
But we also gave them incentives to go to Daleville. Because
Right.
if we can't keep them in downtown, we at least want to keep them in Delaware County.
Okay. During your 3 terms as mayor, how involved over that period of time, because I want to get at whether or not it's changed, was Ball State University, your alma mater,
Yeah.
involved in economic development?
I think it kind of, again, I'm going to go back to, Terry would call them as needed. So
Okay.
there might be some projects that they weren't needed at all on. So if Terry determined there was a need for them to be, and like I said, there's
Right.
probably more of a need now than previously,
Right.
because of, it comes back to the technical workers that you have,
Mhm.
the job skills that need to be there. Many of them are technology companies, and so I think their role, is dependent upon the company.
Okay.
There's no standard answer
Okay.
that they are the most important element. In some cases, they could be a zero element.
Okay.
Where Ivy Tech might be a huge element. If you're
Right.
dealing with a manufacturer that wants to retrain people on a quick basis, that's not what Ball State does. That's what Ivy Tech does. But if you're bringing a high tech company in here that wants high tech grads, that's what Ball State does, and that's not what Ivy Tech does.
Okay.
So it would depend upon, it would be project specific. But like, as I said earlier,
Okay.
the importance of Ball State, I think, has escalated as the type of opportunities has changed.
Okay. Did you always feel while you were mayor that you could get good cooperation from the university?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it never was a case that, there was one president that you had in my tenure that he and I didn't see eye to eye on anything. But it's kind of like the commissioners. When it comes to economic development, everybody throws their swords down and sit around the table and, do everything they can. So never, in my experience, one instance where Ball State was not willing to do whatever they could to make a deal.
There wasn't one instance, or there was one
There was
instance?
not, there was not one
Okay.
instance I can think of
Okay.
I can't think of any entity in this town that would have done, Marlon Creasy usually came to the more important meetings.
Okay.
So I can't think of one instance that everybody didn't do all they could. When Terry would call you, we just kind of followed his lead.
Okay. How much time did you or staff members or others involved in economic development that you know of spend studying what works in other communities and what might not work in other communities? I'm kind of looking as a research base here as to how aware you might have been. Probably Terry and Dan, when I talk to them, I'll ask the same question of, okay, here's what's working in this community, maybe in Indiana, maybe in other parts of the Midwest, or even other parts of the country. I mean, did you spend much time doing that?
That was really more of Terry and Dan's job.
Okay.
I didn't have the expertise to start with. That was not my background. So it was more of their job, especially Terry's job, to say these are the kind of things we need. In fact, that was what we started looking at after we sold the spec building. What's our
Right.
next spec building? And as I walked out the door, we were now looking at what does our next spec building need to be, and we had moved that process along. In the beginning, in fact, the spec building Sally Mae was really built as a manufacturing spec building. It's very high ceilings.
Right, yeah.
It was really, we were able to adapt it.
Yeah.
So now there was, at least when I walked out there was 2 things that were going on. There was a new manufacturing spec building going up on the south side of town, just beyond the ABB.
Right.
And then the city was looking at building a tech spec building, lower ceilings, a little more glass. We were looking at green concepts like green roofs that would be more attractive to a high-tech company. So it's really their determination. The problem is Terry's got a pretty small staff.
Yeah, right.
And he's got to balance what my current employers need to expand.
Right.
All these hits I'm getting on my website that I've got to respond to. Prospects coming to town. All the events that he goes to. And then what do we need to have in our inventory for the future?
Okay. Last question. What role do you think the newspaper can play in economic development, or should play in economic development?
Well, I think their history has been detrimental to economic development.
How so?
The biggest complaint I probably have about the Star Press is very simple. There's nobody to keep them in check. This is a one media town. We do have a radio station. We sort of have a newspaper at Ball State, but for the majority of people, we have one newspaper.
Right.
Even back when I first became mayor, we had two. Even though they were owned by the same company,
Right.
we had two newspapers, and they basically were in a competitive environment. They still competed against each other.
Right.
And I think the level of reporting was much better. They had larger staff. That they've gone through the
Sure.
same thing that we've all gone through.
Right.
They've cut staff. They've cut papers. They've kind of come down to what can we put out. So one thing that happens, when you go back to this shotgun approach, you've got a consultant that's going out there, and then let's say you're the company and I'm the consultant.
Right.
I'm going to go back to you and say, now we've got down to 4 communities. We're going to look at Muncie. We're going to look at Saginaw, Michigan. We're going to look at these other 2 communities.
Right.
Probably what you're going to start doing is going online, look at the starpress.com. And when you start seeing a newspaper that really dwells on negative issues, and my theory is when a policeman messes up, he or she should be on the front page.
Yeah.
But when a policeman saves a child's life,
Yeah.
that should be balanced out. Well, that's just not the way it happens. And I'm not telling you how to run a newspaper, but they can be very detrimental. A case in point was the issue, the development we were dealing with out at I-69 and I-69 and 67, which was not communication. It was a development project that was an amusement type project.
Right.
Had a lot of different entities. It had retail, had a water park, had hotels, had it was this huge development. And the consultants, there was a time that I met with those consultants a couple of times when they were in town, along with, again, mostly, everybody was at the table. They had determined that Muncie is where they wanted, or Delaware County is where they wanted to be. They wanted to be at I-69 and 67. And they deeded 200 acres. I can't remember the exact acreage they deeded. I'm going to say 200. I think that's pretty close. 200 acres is what they needed to buy. Well, there were several different property owners that they have to deal with that. They were dealing with a local realtor to do all of that. Well, those things have to be done quietly. Those are things that we can't put on the front page of the paper that we're going to have this big development out there, because then all the speculators hit the table.
Yeah.
So Terry's very good at keeping things quiet. The problem was when this group was in town, because they were dealing with, they had lots of different things they were dealing with. They wanted to meet with staff at Ball State. They wanted to meet with staff at the hospital. They met with little towns, Daleville. They met with their town. So in other words, they had lots of meetings in this community, and we're telling, they probably met with a couple hundred people during the 2 or 3 days they were here. These 2 guys were here, and they're telling all of us, this has to be kind of confidential. Well, somebody's going to say something, and of course the newspaper's going to pick up on it. So the newspaper picked up on it. It's my understanding that Dan and Terry pleaded with them not to run it. Well, they run the story, and so now the property owners, the prices have doubled. The consultant's mad. He feels like somebody sold him out here. So last I heard, the project was all but it was dead. So there was a project of what was it, $250 million in investment, a couple thousand jobs. I mean, a couple thousand jobs were associated with this particular project. It was going to be a huge opportunity because, in some of our discussions we talked about, when the most conventions you go to will say, here's a spouse package. So while your husband or wife is at the convention, here's the spouse.
Right,
kids.
sure.
Well, we kind of do that, but we don't have a lot of amenities. So if we'd had this huge water park and all this shopping, we could have said, okay, while the spouse is at the attending all the conventions,
Right,
here's a spouse package. You can go out there, we talked about that. So I mean, there was all kinds of huge In addition to just the jobs and the investment.
Boy.
And that was one that was basically killed by the newspaper.
This just happened recently?
No, that was, I was still in office, I'm gonna say
Okay.
October.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
No,
so that's
October
pretty
something.
recent.
Yeah, that's pretty recent,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I can't tell you the process, so, and their philosophy was, we got the story, we got to run the story. So, we pretty much killed that project, so,
Yeah.
If it's a small project, or if it's a project that we're able to contain to the political figures, Ball State officials,
Right.
hospital officials, everybody keeps very quiet about it,
Right.
and it never gets out. But when you've had this larger discussions, because there were going to be things like human performance, so they dealt with human performance
Right.
people.
Oh, yeah,
They
right.
dealt. So you're now dealing with a whole lot of people out there.
Yeah.
So they can have. So there's two ways they can have a negative impact. They can get wind of a project, and the quickest way to lose a project is put it on the front page of your
Yeah,
paper,
yeah.
because confidentiality has to be part of it.
Right.
And it was the whole deal with, and I was not involved at all with the Clarion.
Yeah.
But they were local officials were chastised. Well, you signed these contracts. It kind of comes down. I come in to see you and I say, I've got a potential project that's going to be $100 million. It's going to apply 100 people, and I want to talk to you about it. But you've got to sign this confidentiality clause before we'll talk about it. Now, if you don't sign it, I'm walking. I'm now going to Anderson or Fort Wayne. If you sign it, you got to keep your mouth shut.
Right.
If you don't sign it, they're gone.
Yeah.
So you sign it and you honor it by keeping your mouth shut. Then you get chastised by the newspaper for not telling them what's going on.
Yeah. So it's kind of a two-edged sword.
It's very much a two-edged
Yeah.
sword.
Well, those are all the formal questions I have, but at the end of all my interviews, I always give my interviewee an opportunity to add anything that, in your case, he might wish. So here is your opportunity to reflect back on your distinguished 3 terms as mayor of Muncie, Indiana, and perhaps offer a concluding comment or two on economic development and Mayor Dan Canan.
I guess I would conclude by saying, what is the biggest? We kind of talked about what's the biggest obstacle for the next mayor,
Right.
the present mayor,
Right.
and future commissioners. It is, to me, it is this global trade, and it just terribly irritates me that we put very strict environmental controls on our manufacturers here in the United States, which I support. I'm a Republican, but I'm pretty green. I'm getting more green with that. So I think these are very good things to do. I don't have a problem with not polluting the air or not polluting the water, and not having your workers smell lead.
Right.
I don't have a problem with those things at all. In fact, I support those. And that we pretty much mandate health care and the things that we pretty much mandate as Americans on our manufacturers. I probably don't have a problem with any of those, but I have a real problem when we will. So in order for them to make this engine in the United States, they've got to follow all these strict standards and things that we put in place, which is great. I'm all for that. But we can say, well, we're going to manufacture that same engine in Japan, or I'm sorry, in China, and ship it back here. I think when products are brought back into the United States, whatever our standards are here for our manufacturers, we got to pass a federal law that says anything coming in has to meet these same, wherever it's made at, has to have these same air quality standards, has to have, so the playing field becomes a little bit more level. Now maybe you still got workers that are going to work for pennies on what American workers are going to work for, and maybe the healthcare is not as good, but we're all breathing at some point in time the same air in this world, and we're all drinking the same water, and it just irritates me to see Beijing, China on TV, and they can't see in the middle of the day because of the smog that's out there.
I've been there.
Yeah, well, I haven't been. We've kind of cleaned up our country. Somewhat we're cleaning our country up, but we're not addressing and they have no incentive to do it. If those were the incentives, we said this is what you have to do to ship them back here, they're going to do it, but they're not going to do it on their own. Maybe they don't have the technology, maybe they don't have the need to, but we got to say, okay, if you're going to manufacture it, we'll help you with the technologies, we'll show you how to do it. But by golly, if you're shipping something back to the United States, just like the lead now coming in.
It's exactly what I was thinking of that.
But there ought to be, it's not comparable. It'd be like Ball State trying to give an education. You've got an identical university sitting 2 blocks away that gives the same education for pennies on the dollar. Well, Ball State's going to have no students.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm all for fair trade, or free trade, but I'm also, it has to be fair. And it is not a fair environment. Now, I'm not saying that you know, maybe the unions haven't become overboard in what they're asking for, and certainly healthcare issues, you know, those things have got to be scaled back. We started doing that in the city.
Right.
But it just infuriates me, even now that I'm not mayor, to think that we're buying products from other countries coming here. I'm not for tariffs or any of that, but I'm certainly for the standard. Whatever our standards are here, if they're good enough for Americans, why aren't they good enough for the Chinese people or the Vietnamese people? So that to me is the biggest issue mayors are facing, which is the playing field is not level.
Right.
We got a better workforce here, better educated workforce, but you know, so that's huge. That's why technology companies are kind of really good for us, because they don't, you know, they're not going to go to China. But the manufacturing, you know, we still have to have manufacturing here in this country. Where do we go in a time of war if we don't have any manufacturing here in our country? And so that is a huge obstacle. That's where I think our federal legislators should be looking at, you know, how do we straighten some of these things out, and how do we encourage our world to be a better place for everybody.
Oh, that's a good observation. Well, thank you very much for participating in the project. I really
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
I hope I helped.